Have you ever found yourself at a roadblock with Dungeons and Dragons? Maybe you've thought about becoming a dungeon master or a game master, and you're not really sure what that entails. Or maybe even you've thought about what class may be the strongest and why they are the strongest.
And maybe you've played every class of Dungeons and Dragons, but you haven't played every subclass and you've overlooked some. Or maybe that new interesting character that you've daydreamed about for weeks isn't as fun to play in game. Here at Theoretical Insights of D&D, me and Rob are going to be discussing some insights and theories of Dungeons and Dragons. So let's get ready
And roll for insight.
So, Rob, let's start off. Would you like to tell us about your favorite D&D character, or one of your favorite D&D characters?
Oh Lord, it was actually the character that I played in your campaign, 4 years ago. Philip Vontarius Hildebrand III, a bard, multiclassing the cleric, who had a angel named Ishmael dwelling within him, who happened to be the angel of wrath, whose sole purpose was to redeem himself after a drug deal gone bad. I had a ton of fun with that character. I just wish the campaign had lasted longer.
That was like your second character ever, technically.
Yeah.
Technically, your first one that you made yourself.
Yeah, I built that one completely alone.
I remember you gave me the backstory with like the angel possessing your body, and I skimmed over it while I was reading it, and I just okayed it. And when you brought it up in game, I was panicking real hard because I'm like, this is way too overpowered.
Yeah, but you figured it out. That's the whole reason I gave complete control to you.
It was
'Cause if it had been under my control and you gave me a whole separate sheet for Ishmael and Angel of Wrath, I mean, it would have broken everything.
it would have been chaotic more than it already was.
It was pretty bad.
Yeah.
Scrappy and the dadgum rabid dog power truck.
Man, a lot of inside jokes. One of my favorite characters that I played was Limble, a Warforged artificer, who was originally a robot programmed to be used in war. On the day of his coming to life or awakening, the lab that he was in collapsed, and he lived there under these stones. Well, he laid there, didn't live there for 100 years or so, and then he was dug up. Messed with some mercenaries, went to a different world, talked to a god of magic and science, and discovered how human emotion works. Then eventually started his own new race called the Starhearts.
That's amazing. That goes to prove also that you can do great and powerful things after a good long nap.
That's true. Talking about power, are you familiar with the power gap in Dungeons and Dragons between arcane classes and martial classes?
I've heard of it, but I don't think it's as bad as everybody makes it out to be.
Well, let's get into the power gap today.
So you've heard about the power gap where caster classes are going to be outperforming martial classes in pretty much all pillars of play, but mostly combat. You've got wizards with their fireballs, sorcerers with their lightning bolts, warlocks with their hexes and whatnot. What are your thoughts on the power gap? Is this a real thing, or is this just something that someone's made up?
I think that it's real, but it's not as bad as people make it out to be.
Okay.
Casters have their strength, but they are short-lived. Once you run out of spell slots, anybody who's played a warlock knows, once you use up those spell slots, you fall back to cantrips, and cantrips are not always the strongest.
That's true. And also with martial classes, they are pretty much designed to keep on going and going and going,
Well, they also have the most survivability.
That's true, yeah. With a higher hit dice or a larger hit dice, they're going to be able to take more damage on average than a caster class.
Well, not only that, but unlike the caster classes, they don't have to expend one of their much-needed spell slots to have a decent AC to keep them getting hit.
Yeah, things with mage armor. Even
or
then,
shield.
Yeah, or shield of faith, any kind of defensive thing, a mirror image even.
Yeah.
With a fighter or a barbarian, they got the unarmored defense. They're always ready. Let's talk about the how the power gap comes into play. We're talking about the three pillars of play. Combat, social, and exploration. We've already kind of talked about the combat where the casters can run out of their spell slots pretty easily, and the martial classes, they're going to keep on going. But what about social? What does the power gap look like in a social pillar of play?
Well, it depends on how you're playing it. Are you talking about the social experience during in-game conversation between character and NPC, or are you talking about between players?
Do they look different in either scenario, or are they the same?
Oftentimes they are different because you and me as players can sit here and have a conversation, but if we were to actually role play our characters, say you're playing a barbarian with an intelligence of 7, and I'm playing a wizard with an intelligence of 17, we're not going to be able to have a really long, drawn out conversation that's going to amount to anything.
That's true.
So I think overall, if you're playing a fighter who most of the time they're well known, often backstories of fighters are soldiers or former bounty hunters, people that were in their hometowns, guards, stuff like that. You don't really hear a whole lot of fighters coming from a criminalistic standpoint. It's usually more rogues,
Yeah.
warlocks.
There's also, the characters who break cliches and stereotypes. So we've seen there are some fighters who come from criminal backgrounds, but just based on average, they're just the regular guy in a regular job.
Yeah, you think at the end of the day, a fighter is Dwayne Johnson without being buffed up by Hollywood with super strength and being untouchable. Everybody likes the guy. There may be some that don't, but for the most part, he is well liked.
Yeah, the fighter.
Now, you go onto the other end and say wizard, highly intelligent. Well, they have to be for the class because that's their spellcasting modifier.
They don't have to be, but if you want to be efficient.
Yeah, if you want to be efficient, you could always be a dumb wizard and just not do anything.
Part of me wants to play a dumb wizard.
That would be great.
Just be absolutely. I think it'd be an interesting character. Just a dumb wizard. Any kind of caster class where their spellcasting ability is not good. I think that'd be an interesting character. But that's a topic for another day.
I'd like to cast Fireball, but I left my component bag at home.
Yeah, I didn't study during my college years, so I know how to do Fireball.
What does this word do?
Wait, you mean I have to read to do spells?
Elementary school all over again.
Here's a trope breaker: dumb wizard, smart barbarian,
Oh, that'd be hilarious to put them two together.
nerd rage. But anyways, back on topic with like the social. When you come down to social, it doesn't just involve like just regular conversation. This also involves like political intrigue, intimidation or interrogation, trying to get information verbally through NPCs or even other players. And when it comes to that, I feel like the power gap is even more present in that scenario.
Yeah.
Because a fighter or a martial class, any kind of martial class, they can roll for intimidation or deception or persuasion. A wizard could do that too, or a sorcerer could do that too. But the casters, they're going to have access to things that make it easier.
Yeah. They don't have spells that they can cast and all of that.
Charm person, friends.
Well, even excluding the spells themselves, if you go in and look at the base statistics for these classes, their main saving throws, you've got the Bard, the Sorcerer, and the Warlock, 3 of the main casting classes that all are one of their main charisma is their big basis.
Yeah, even Paladin, which is a half caster, has the charisma attribute casting, spell casting ability.
And that makes the social interaction in game a whole lot easier, especially if you're trying to get information and the person's not so quite willing to give it to you.
Oh yeah, that's true. The power gap is definitely way more present in the social aspect than in combat. At least that's my opinion on the matter.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you on that.
Because in combat, that wizard or sorcerer or warlock, they're going to run out of their spell slots. They're going to rely on those cantrips. That fighter, he's attacking 2 times every turn. That barbarian, he's still swinging that great axe, whether he has rage or not.
Yeah.
It's, you can run out of spell slots, but D&D doesn't encompass, how sharp my sword is after I keep swinging.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about exploration. And I feel like the power gap is just as present here as it is with the social. Because you got druid, which is nature-based magic. It's if I was lost in the woods, I honestly would rather have a druid by my side than a fighter.
Well, I mean, not all of that, but the druid being so in one with nature, being able to call upon its power, is pretty much what the druid class is doing. It's calling upon the power of nature to aid them in battle or wherever they may need it. But don't forget, because it's often overlooked for everybody out there that likes to throw a fighter in and play with a bow instead of a ranger, I highly encourage you to take a second look at the ranger class now that's been revised.
Oh yeah.
Just in the games that I'm running, I have a person that's playing a ranger. Beast Conclave, everything. They have a wolf. But that's not what's important. What's important is that after traveling for an hour, no matter where they are at, they are not impeded in any way of the surrounding area as long as they can get through. And that is including with a full party, horses, and cart. They could walk through the middle of a swamp and not have to slow down.
That is
just because the ranger's in the party.
The thing is, though, ranger's also a half caster, because it has access to other spells. That's second level.
Yeah, well, the thing is about that is it's what makes it so good and sometimes dangerous. Because when you're a DM that's planning something like the northern side of a mountain range that's covered in 3 or 4 foot of snow because it's in the middle of wintertime, yes, it's going to be extremely cold and you can have that come into play. But if you're trying to slow that party down, not to be a butt, but to add the depth to it, because you're going through 3 or 4 foot of snow, and then here's this party of 6 adventurers with a horse and a cart that's walking on top because the ranger's there, not because of the spell they cast, but because they are a ranger.
Yeah, the ranger definitely has the abilities. The ranger has these exploration abilities that come from its martial side rather than its casting side. But then again, if you're just talking about, it's a case-by-case scenario. If you're traveling like with a wagon and cart, the ranger's obviously going to help you out in that regard. If you're traveling with like just the party, or even just maybe like by yourself, maybe you like got separated from the party and you're like stuck in the woods, or and exploration isn't just talking about like forest, but
Yeah, I mean forest, mountains, swamp, desert, whatever.
Yeah, it's
city.
You'll have access to spells like fly. You can. Oh, we have heavy, thick trees that are kind of blocking my sight, and I'm getting lost. I'm just going to fly up.
Even more importantly than fly, some may have the ability to cast Featherfall.
Oh, Featherfall.
You can't forget about Featherfall, because if you're walking through the tops of trees trying to get through, we'll just picture ourselves as Bilbo in The Hobbit when he climbs up to the top of the trees and says, "I see it from here," and then all kinds of stuff goes down. You start to fall out of a tree, if you have the ability to cast Featherfall, well, instead of falling 60 foot and taking all that damage, you just float down.
Yeah. So maybe, I think my opinion's changed. I don't think the power gap is as prominent in exploration. It depends on case-by-case scenario.
I think there are 2 or 3 classes that really stand out as, if you're going to have a campaign that the DM has described to you is going to be, there's a lot of exploring, there's a lot of traveling, there's a lot of digging through stuff to try and find it.
Someone's got to play a ranger.
Someone's got to play either a ranger or a druid, or somebody that has a high enough knowledge of the area around, or has some kind of a background to where they can walk into a new area out in the wilderness and get to an understanding with their surrounding area to where they're not going to get lost at every turn like the rest of the party would be.
Oh, yeah.
Because if you have, say, if you're in one of those campaigns and you have a barbarian, a fighter, a wizard, a rogue, and, say, a bard, nobody's good in exploring, you're going to spend 90% of your time trying to get to the place rather than progressing the story.
Well, sometimes the destination isn't the prime thing, it's the journey.
Yeah. Well, even though, let's be honest, there's sometimes the DM will sit there with a face palm like, did none of you are none of you good in nature checks?
Again, I think that may be a problem. That's a problem that can be handled in session 0.
Yeah.
And those in a campaign like that, or even a one shot like that, the uh, tour guide or the nature guide guy is just as essential as someone's like, we need healing, so someone play a cleric.
Yeah. You always, it doesn't matter if it's, even if it's just a one shot, because a one shot could always be you load in and you're in a 5-hour fight.
That's true.
Or it could be a 5-hour journey and a 30-minute fight.
That's true. Also with exploration, let's kind of shift gears from the woods and nature, because exploration can happen pretty much anywhere, even city. Even in a city or even in a dungeon, really.
And that's when the tables would turn again.
Yeah.
In a city, I do not believe that the ranger and the druid would really do much good. While you're in the big cities, I think the main two classes that you would want, being highly charismatic and often played by smaller classes, would be the rogue and the bard.
Oh yeah. I mean, just look at
maybe even the paladin or cleric, because they can be well known, especially if it's in a region that they're from.
mm-hmm.
To where maybe their deity is inhabiting that region as of right now. Say they serve a Vulcan or whatever, and there is a temple of Vulcan in that city. Maybe those people in that city will be well known to them, or the people of that town or city will be more welcoming to them and say, "Hey, would you be able to point me to the Night Owl Inn? Yeah, it's on the other side of town. Take 2 lefts to the right, and you're there."
That reminds me, back when I first started DMing, I would always, when the players were trying to get to a specific building, I'd have a plot point where it's like, hey, you need to go to this one building in the quest. And it's like, okay, well, how do we get there? It's like, well, you don't see any signs. Roll for persuasion, asking. This was before I knew what I was doing as a DM.
Do we know what we're doing now?
No. But anyways,
that's a good point.
I'd be like, roll to persuade an NPC to tell you, rather than just asking an NPC, being willing. There was no reason for them to roll. And then the NPC would say, hey, take a left, a right, and then 2 rights. And then as the DM, I have a conversation, be like, all right, which way do you go? And they'd be like, wherever you told me. It's like, well, which way was that? It was not a fun, engaging thing. It was basically just repeating the same information. I'm glad I've evolved past that.
Well, not only that, but that was at a point to where you didn't know if you were going to be able to get people to actually get into the game you were running. Oftentimes, it's easier, and this is a whole nother topic. Well, I'll bring it up anyway. It's easier, I think, for a DM to play or run a game that has been pre-planned, like Grim Hollow or Tomb of Annihilation or anything like that, compared to somebody that sat down and wrote from, say, level 5 to level 15 every detail and created this own world, and now they're sitting there right before session 0 or even right after session 0 worried as to whether these people that are playing in the game are actually going to become as invested in it as they would like for them to be.
That's true. Let's talk about the dungeon exploration, though. Obviously, right off the gate, the rogue is going to be your go-to guy.
Well, yeah, especially if it's filled with traps.
Yeah, the thieves' tools. If there's any locked doors, sure. If there's locked doors in this dungeon, you can cast Knock as a caster, but that's just alerted everyone to your presence. Whereas the rogue, give him some lock picks, he's going through that. Unless it's like arcane sealed,
I think also a highly dexterous class like the rogue, but maybe a monk, if you choose the right subclass of ranger, or you build them correctly, or maybe even an archer fighter, if you build them correctly, could be really useful in a dungeon when it comes to, hey, there's a 15-foot gap. Make an acrobatics check if you want to jump across, or it's a...
Well, in that regard, the casters would have access to the spell Jump, which, if I'm remembering correctly, it triples your long jump distance.
Yeah, that's true.
Again, it really, when it boils down to it, I feel like if we're looking at the 3 different pillars of play, social has I feel like the power gap is more present there. It's a lot bigger because the caster classes, they just have access to things that the martial classes can't compensate for. In exploration, it's a case-by-case scenario, where you're at, what you're trying to do, what are you exploring.
Well, see, with that explanation, I think we need to go into a conversation as to which one of those three has the most relevance in D&D overall,
Definitely,
as to what our opinion would be anyway.
I feel like combat and social. Those are from the games that I've played and the games that I've ran. Combat and social are the probably the biggest two elements.
I would agree with that, but I think realistically, from a player standpoint, having good combat is important. You don't want to go in, me specifically as a player, I don't want to go in and one-shot everything. I want to be able to feel like I've done something at the end of the
Now I
fight.
want to one shot everything.
Well, that's
Put me
only-
up to TMI. I want to one shot TMI.
See, you're the problem with 5e. But no, I want to feel like it's hard earned. I don't want to be left bloody and bruised with 3 bouts of unconscious and 4 failed death saves over a whole fight. But
Because you would be dead.
well, no, that's what I'm talking about. If you go down 2 failed death saves, come back up, and then 2 more.
Yeah.
But I don't want to be fed on. I don't want to be fed by a silver spoon. I want to feel like, because at the end of the day, D&D is no more than a storytelling game, real by math. For those of you that are bad at math, it's math. That is a way to escape from the real life bullcrap that we have to go through every day. We get to escape from bills. We get to escape from any kind of relationship issues that we may be having at the time. And we get to focus fully on this character we've built. And if you're good at role playing, and you've been doing it for a while, or if you're trying to get good at it, you can completely lose yourself in the character and feel like you are someone else for a few hours.
Yeah.
And that's why I think the social and exploration are evenly tied in my book, followed closely by combat.
Yeah, I enjoy that. I also really like the aspect of it being a game,
Yes.
and I'm sort of a power gamer. I'm not the worst one where I'm going to be like killing everything in sight and just
Being the best at level 1.
I'm not going to be the guy that's basically like, oh, I have an entire party, I don't need them.
Yeah.
I'm going to be the guy that's like, okay, well,
It's okay if 2 or 3 of our 6 go down because I can handle it.
yeah.
I think every party needs something like that.
I enjoy some light power gaming because to me, yeah, it is an escape from reality, but it's also a game where I can be very good at something, whether it be combat. I even sort of power gamed when I played the healing character for your game. The Warlock Sorcerer.
Oh, don't get me started on the Warlock Sorcerer combo. You could completely break my game, but I'm glad you're not.
Yeah, I'm glad that I'm focused more on the healing aspect because you was like, I asked you when I was joining in, it's like, hey, do you guys have a healer? And then you were like, well, we got a cleric, but he doesn't do clericy things.
Yeah, pretty much. He's gotten better about it. The cleric's gotten better.
He's got his niche.
Yeah.
He's really good. And so I'm like, I'll play a healer. And you're like, okay, that's good. And I was like, I don't want to play another cleric. I don't want to double up. I was like, well, what could I do? Sorcerer Warlock, baby. You got that Celestial, Divine Soul Sorcerer and Celestial Warlock.
Like, oh, I'm out of my Ooga Booga magic. Let me spend some of my sorcerer points.
Yeah, I could heal in like 6 different languages because I picked Azmar as like the race. You got the healing spells and you got like class abilities. But we've gotten off topic. A lot.
We do, anyway.
Yeah,
Every time.
every time.
But not really, because we were talking about the combat.
Yeah, let's kind of go back to that power gamer versus role player gamer. I guess that's what would be classified or power gamer.
Yeah.
You can easily, if you are good at power gaming or metagaming, you can easily make a martial class good at any of these and outperform a caster who's
easily.
not power gamed.
However, and I think it goes into what kind of game you're playing.
Definitely.
Once again, if it's a pre-made game like Grim Hollow, I don't know if the DM, it
Well,
goes from person to person.
Grim Hollow is just the guide. It's not
Right,
There's
yeah.
no adventure.
Tomb of Annihilation.
Yeah, Tomb of Annihilation, Dragon Heist.
Yeah, Dragon Heist. Well, we'll use those for example. A DM is running it, and it also goes from person to person. Everybody's different as to how they would like for the game to go. But at the end of the day, I have a feeling that the people that are running those pre-made campaigns may not so much care about the story. They're wanting the players to fully enjoy, hey, let's just go in here and I'm going to help y'all destroy this world and become powerful.
That sounds like a game I'd love.
Now, there's also the game like mine.
Yours is definitely way more story driven.
I have written from level 1 and I'm going to write all the way to level 16. Spoiler alert, it's not going to level 20 anymore.
Oh, dang.
Those are spoilers next week. However, when you write from level 1 to level 15, 16 or whatever, and you're putting all this lore into the world out of the top of your head, of course, kind of borrowed and stolen from different things. Skyrim and Divinity Original Sin 2 being the big ones. Thank you, Larkin Studios.
Listen, any good story's got a little bit of theft.
Well, yeah.
I mean, look at Lord of the Rings. Frodo was a thief.
You got a point. And Bilbo was a burglar.
That's true.
But when you have a story and a campaign that is so heavily invested by the DM who has written it themselves, they're going to care a lot more about how the story plays out compared to, okay, well, that combat was great. I think that's a moment where at the session 0, you need to have a conversation with everybody, like I did, about, look, role play is going to be a very big portion of this game. And this game, we're going to be playing for a long time, so you're going to have plenty of time to get used to it. Don't be shy or afraid to let your character take over. And oftentimes that's really hard to do.
It really is.
But at the end of the day, and this is my personal opinion, because I know there are power gamers that prefer to go in, wreck, and go home.
They're looking at the numbers and be like, I want more numbers.
When at the end of the day, or at the end of a campaign, when you think back onto what your favorite campaigns were, I always tend to go back to story. Like the cleric that I was playing in the online campaign, Aziel, had a tremendous story and character arc. At one point, he was going to portray Vulcan and go to this new Ice Witch. And that's the class I was telling you about, the new subclass, the frigid domain for the cleric that my DM had made for me.
Yeah.
If I was going to go through with it. And I'm thinking about if I run in another game, talking to a DM and playing that, because it's awesome.
Oh, yeah.
It really is. But at one point, he was going to turn his back on Vulcan, who had become a father figure to him after his mother was killed and his dad kind of went cuckoo crazy for Cocoa Puffs. That he was really the only one he had.
Yeah.
And he was going to turn his back on him. But unknowing to the Ice Witch and even unknown to Vulcan, the entire time, Aziel was just trying to get Vulcan to show up. Because they were trapped in this frozen world on another plane that they had been sent to try and find somebody and someone to get a powerful mage to start splitting this seal that was 50-50 shared between Aziel and his brother Raylan to try and keep the demon and devil hordes at bay from taking over the planes. It was a magical seal that was shared between brothers in a bloodline. Unfortunately, the mom had 2 kids instead of 1.
This is a very convoluted story. I'm about it, though.
Yeah, it was really, really hard to grasp the entire idea behind it. But going back and realizing that the backstory that I had given the DM, along with the backstory that my brother's player had given the DM, Cole, that he pretty much based his entire campaign around that's special.
Oh, yeah.
To think our mom was killed by what we found out to be an Aaron Yes, We find that Aaron Yes later, and we beat her to a bloody pulp, torture her, and get all those years of frustration out after years of training. Because I was 30, Aziel was 32, and Raylan was he was 36, and Raylan was 31. And to finally get that, just to look back and be like, okay, there was a lot of that campaign and what happened with dealing with deities, because we had based on Greek, Norse, and Egyptian pantheons, along with some of the D&D stuff like the Raven Queen, and just all kind of mixed and mingled together. Just seeing how much the backstory of two characters affected the campaign and made it that much more interesting, and the fact that one of those characters was the one I was playing, it's a special feeling, and I want that to be a feeling that people get for their characters as well. And oftentimes you only get that in the story-driven games.
That's true.
I think at the end of the day, the story-driven game with strong combat, with combat that makes you feel like you've done something.
Oh, yeah.
Even if you're power leveled and you're really, really good at combat, or you're really good at social, or you're really good at exploration, as long as there's really good story to go along with it, with a character arc somewhere in the middle or towards the end, it is a campaign to be remembered, and you'll always think back to, wow, that was, at the end, my goal for the campaign that I'm running now that you're playing in is at the final session, when I say thank you for playing my game, I hope that I can look at all 6 of you and see in your eyes that you don't want it to end just like I know.
Yeah.
I think that's the goal, and that's the feeling that I believe that everybody that plays D&D should have in a long-term campaign.
How do we get from the Power Gap to your ideal D&D game?
Well, we were talking about
Yeah, we come off tangent. Let's go ahead and wrap this up, because we're getting pretty far along. That was a good. I definitely agree with you. You know, it's a story.
Hey, I was talking about the stuff we were talking about now.
Yeah. So if the Power Gap is like a huge problem in your game for our DMs out there, some easy ways to kind of make it not so prevalent.
Mix it up.
Yeah. If you've got like the one, maybe you got like half the party is casters and the other half are martial classes, and your martial players are feeling like lackluster. It's like, well, what am I even here for? Here's some tips to kind of change up or basically make that power gap smaller. One, with combat, just run more encounters. Don't give them as much long rests. You know, because then the only ones who are going to be able to keep up with that is warlocks, because they'll get their things in a short rest. And that will give the fighters, the barbarians, the monks, just more availability to feel powerful, because they're not. The only thing that's lowering on them is like their class features, like, you know, action surge and things like that, and rage. But they are still attacking. Every single turn.
And if it comes
with
down,
extra attack.
Yeah, and if it comes down to the point to where you have 6 people in your party as a DM, and all of them are good at combat, but not really good at anything else, if you don't want to hop from combat to combat to combat to combat, because as a DM standpoint, combat after combat can get boring, especially when you're planning the encounters, when you're having to come up with new enemies, because you fought 15 bandits last week, let's throw another 15 at you this week. You know, stick them in town for a few days.
Yeah.
Put them in the woods or on a mountainside or in the middle of the desert for a few days. Have them interact with some NPCs that you've thought of. Give them some characteristics. See if you can help their characters grow. Give those that are solely focused on combat the chance to realize, hey, you know what? Maybe I could be good at persuading people to do what would be beneficial to the party, or haggling for prizes in a shop. Mix it up.
Yeah, and that kind of goes into like things that you could do on the social pillar of play on how to close that power gap. Just kind of let the players kind of explore it out. Maybe, you know, they go back into town or back into the city or back wherever, and they're meeting like other NPCs. Give like the martial classes some people that they already know.
Yeah.
And honestly, at the end of the day, if you as the DM, and this is entirely, you have to know your game. If you realize like, hey, this one player is wanting to engage more socially and roleplay with NPCs, but the sorcerer is casting friends on everybody, or charming every NPC with magic that he meets. Maybe fudge one dice roll, sorcerer spell doesn't land, and that will open up an opportunity for the other player. Again, this is when it comes to fudging rolls, that's some controversial.
There's a time and a place for it. There's always the fudge roll to save a character, and there's always the fudge roll to give your enemy that they're fighting a better chance. That way, it's not just a wipe off the front of the board.
Yeah,
and even in the social standpoint, if it's something that you would like for them to work for, instead of being like, okay, well, I cast friends, well, he's able to resist it.
Oh yeah,
I want you to be able to work for it instead of just get it on a silver spoon.
That's true. With exploration, I'm not real sure how to close that power gap because it's a case-by-case scenario. Maybe just change the setting.
I'll tell you, if you're looking for, if you know you're probably going into a game that's going to have a lot of exploration, if you have a rogue, a druid, a bard, and a ranger in your party, and then throw in 2 meaty classes for frontline offense and defense, I mean, you're pretty much set for exploration.
Yeah.
Whether it be in the city, underground, in the forest, on the mountains, in the desert, you're pretty much set. And it's not those classes specifically, but it's something that would be good for each one. And that's a conversation for the player to have with the DM, not only at session 0, but throughout.
Yeah.
Like, look, I know you're the DM, but for you to be able to progress the story best, what do you think I should give my character to where I can help you do so?
Yeah.
Players are there to help the DM as much as possible. The DM is there to help his players as much as possible. So I think that's where, I think that's the best place to be, really, is everybody's trying to help each other become better.
Honestly, if you have like a problem, you got a ranger in the party or a druid, or if you got like a druid in the party that's like does all like the nature survival things, what you got to do is just change the setting.
Yeah.
Be like, hey, you're in the woods, and all of a sudden, of course this is going to take some time to repair, but like, you're in the woods, all of a sudden the ground underneath you opens up, you all fall, and you're in this dungeon now, and you got to get out. And that throws the druid completely off his element because he doesn't recognize any of the local plants, because there's not a whole lot of plants, most likely.
And if for some reason there's a rogue or a bard or any kind of dungeon delving expert in the party from a backstory long forgotten or whatever, it gives them the chance to shine that they haven't had so far.
Yeah, the rogue in the back is like, well, I only do sneak attack. I'm just good at combat, but I want to explore some. And the druid's over here is like, well, I can turn into animals. I'll just do all the exploration. You turn the dynamic up on its head because it's now like the rogue's like, oh, I actually have to do things besides stab things in the back.
Yep, and it'll give that player a chance to be in the limelight for a little bit.
Yeah.
Because when one person's in it all the time, everybody else feels left out. But when it's swapping in between, you realize, hey, we're going to have to go back into those caves to the northwest because we got to go find this lost artifact. And that's when the party can be like, look, Belshazzar, you were really good in the last one. Would you mind leading us through this one? And that's going to build that player up and be like, okay, they need me, or at least they act like they do. And it's going to give that person the gumption to be able to role play their character even more.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, out of everything, we're speaking generally. We don't know what's going on in every D&D game.
No.
And you know your game better than we do. So, if you're a DM and you're struggling with like the power gap and you want to close it, hopefully these things kind of help you out, but maybe they're not going to work.
Now, TPK is not the only answer.
In some cases it is.
Yeah, in some cases it is. I've contemplated it.
Hey, it's a liability. It's a viable option too. I think that about wraps it up. So see y'all next time.
Hope you enjoyed it. See you soon.